There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't come with warnings or dramatic music or a hand on your shoulder saying, "Brace yourself." They come quietly, like a silver car, slowing down on a county road, on an ordinary morning, while you're standing at your kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in your hand. I saw her before she saw the house. She was driving the way people drive when they're fighting with themselves, slowly, hesitantly, like every rotation of the tire is a question she hasn't answered yet. Should I keep going? Should I turn back? Does she even want to see me? The car stopped at the edge of our gate. And my breath stopped with it. Because I knew that car. I'd grown up watching it pull into driveways and parking lots and church Sunday mornings. I'd ridden in the passenger seat of that car through thunderstorms and summer road trips and the particular silence of two sisters who had run out of things to say to each other. My sister, Vanessa. 3 years of silence, and there she was, parked at the edge of my life, phone pressed to her ear, crying so hard her shoulders were shaking like she was trying to hold something inside her body that was too large to contain. She was staring at the house. Our house. Except it wasn't our house. It was mine. Built by the hands of the man my father called a mistake. Built on land my family said we'd never afford. Built from the ground up by two people who were told, very clearly, very deliberately, that they didn't deserve help. She sat there for a long time. And I stood at that window for a long time. Neither of us moved. And in that stillness, 8 years of my life played back to me like numbers on a ledger I had spent too long refusing to total. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want you to do one thing. Subscribe to this channel. Not because of an algorithm. Not because of a notification bell. But because this story, this particular story, is for every person who ever poured themselves completely, unreservedly, and quietly into people who treated that pouring like it was simply water from a tap. Available. Expected. Free. If that's ever been you, stay with me. Because what happened between that kitchen window and that silver car is the story of how I finally learned what I was worth. My name is Sarah. 32 years old. Licensed CPA. Wife of a man with calloused hands and an unshakable conscience. Co-founder of a property company that, at the time my sister sat crying in that driveway, was worth more than $1.2 million. And for 8 years before any of that existed, I kept my family's failing hardware store alive. For free. I want you to sit with those two words. For free. Not for a reduced rate. Not for a family discount. Not for a promise of repayment someday when business got better. For free. 8 years of quarterly bookkeeping. 8 years of tax preparation. 8 years of payroll management, vendor invoice reconciliation, insurance policy negotiations, cash flow projections, and accounts receivable tracking. 8 years of driving to a store that smelled like sawdust and my childhood, sitting in a back office on a folding chair, and making sure the numbers never lied. I never sent a single invoice. I never asked for a single check. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family doesn't charge family. I told myself that somewhere in the invisible ledger of love and sacrifice, the balance would eventually even out. I was wrong about all three. To understand how this story begins, you need to understand the town it was born in. Small city, Georgia. The kind of place where everyone knows your last name before they know your first. Where the pew your family sits in at Sunday service communicates something about your standing that no business card ever could. Where a hardware store on Main Street can become as central to a family's identity as the blood flowing through its veins. My father, Richard Henderson, opened Henderson Hardware when I was 10 years old. He borrowed the money from his parents. He and my mother Janet, who had spent years training as a registered nurse before giving it all up to run the register, built that store from nothing. 2 decades of inventory counts and early mornings and vendor disputes and Sunday dinners where the conversation always wound its way back to the quarterly numbers. The store was everything. Our income. Our identity. Our insurance policy against the fear of having nothing. When I passed my CPA exam at 24, my father's longtime accountant had just retired. Replacing him would cost the store $4,000 to $5,000 a year, money they simply didn't have. I said, I'll handle it. Just temporarily. That was 8 years before this story begins. My sister Vanessa was 3 years younger than me and everything I was not, at least on the surface of things. She was radiant in that particular way that makes people stop mid-sentence when you walk into a room. She worked at a boutique on Mulberry Street that sold $40 candles and scarves imported from Portugal. She was the daughter in the family Christmas card, always positioned at the center of the frame. She was the one my mother brought to church luncheons and introduced first at neighborhood gatherings. She was the one whose engagement photo went on the mantel before the ring had even been properly sized. I was the one with a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom. I was the one who had a spreadsheet open on Christmas morning. I didn't resent Vanessa then. Looking back now, I think I resented myself for believing, deeply and stubbornly, that if I just kept doing everything right, kept every number clean, kept every obligation fulfilled, the invisible ledger between what I gave and what I received would eventually balance. Ledgers always balance. That's what I had been taught. I was about to learn that some people never intend for them to. Vanessa got engaged on a Saturday in April. His name was Bradley Parker, 31 years old. Sales manager at the Honda dealership out on Route 41. He drove a leased SUV and wore watches that cost more than my monthly rent. He had an opinion about everything, except his own spending habits. The engagement dinner was at my parents' house. Good china, pot roast, a bottle of champagne that cost more than the food it accompanied. Vanessa held out her hand so everyone could admire the ring, 2 carats, princess cut, catching the dining room light like it had been designed specifically for this moment. Bradley beamed. My mother kept refilling Vanessa's glass. My father carved the roast with the slow satisfaction of a man who believed he had arranged something correctly. I sat at the end of the table. I ate quietly. I smiled when smiling was required. And I watched. Then Vanessa started talking about the wedding. Lake Sinclair venue. 200 guests. A live band. A custom gown from a designer in Atlanta. Orchids flown in from Ecuador because Vanessa had seen them in a magazine and decided they were exactly right. Bradley quoted the number the way he'd quote a car payment. We're looking at around $80,000. Maybe more with the upgrades. My parents exchanged a look. And I want you to understand something about that look, because it contained everything that was about to happen. It wasn't worry. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't the instinctive flinch of 2 people hearing a number that alarmed them. It was the look of 2 people who had already made a decision, and were waiting, patiently, deliberately, for the right moment to announce it. My father set down the carving knife. He wiped his hands on his cloth napkin. He cleared his throat. He looked at my mother, and she gave the smallest nod. We've been talking, he said. We're giving Vanessa $100,000 for the wedding. She deserves the best start. The table held its breath for exactly 1 second. And then Vanessa squealed and covered her mouth with both hands. Bradley stood up and shook my father's hand. My mother pulled Vanessa into a hug with tears streaming freely down her face. And I sat at the end of the table. Doing the math I could not make myself stop doing. $100,000. That was more than double the annual profit of Henderson Hardware, the business I had personally kept financially solvent for 8 years without receiving a single dollar in compensation. That was more than I had managed to save in the entirety of my professional career. That was 2 years of free bookkeeping sitting directly across the table from me, wrapped in a diamond ring and dissolved in champagne bubbles. I set down my fork slowly. Derek and I have been talking about getting married too, I said. My voice was calm, measured, nothing extravagant. Maybe a small ceremony, something simple. My father looked at me. He didn't look past me, didn't look through me the way parents sometimes do when they're only half listening. He looked directly, deliberately, at me, and he said the words, "You don't deserve any help." Just like that. No hesitation. No softening. No glance away. Derek doesn't have a real career. His family went bankrupt. I'm not throwing good money after a mistake. Nobody at that table flinched. Vanessa studied the ring on her finger with sudden and intense interest. Bradley lifted his champagne glass and took a slow sip. My mother folded her napkin into a perfect, precise rectangle, and said absolutely nothing. The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. I picked up my fork, set it back down, pushed my chair back and stood up slowly, Okay, I said. Just that. One word. I carried my plate to the kitchen, rinsed it under the faucet, dried it with the dish towel hanging on the oven handle, put it back in the cabinet in its correct place. I walked to the front door, put on my coat, picked up my keys, and I drove home to the apartment I shared with the man my father had just publicly classified as a mistake. That was the last meal I ate in that house. My mother called the following morning at 7:15. I was already at my desk, reviewing a client's quarterly returns. The number appeared on my screen and I answered it the way you answer calls from people you love despite everything, automatically, before the wiser part of your brain can intervene. No hello. No how are you this morning. No pause to acknowledge what had happened 12 hours earlier across a pot roast and a bottle of champagne. Just, your father didn't mean it like that. Damage control. Before coffee. He's worried about you, Sarah. Derek is sweet. He really is. But he doesn't have stability. I let the word hang in the air between us. Stability. This from a woman who had married a man who borrowed $40,000 from his parents, nearly lost everything in his first year of business, and spent 2 solid decades living one bad quarter away from closing the doors permanently. My mother used the word stability the way people use umbrellas, not to protect themselves, but to keep the rain off the image they've constructed of themselves. I appreciate the concern, I said. Is there anything else? Don't be like that. We're family. Then treat me like one. She had no response for that. I hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my apartment with the Georgia morning sun pressing through the blinds in long flat strips, and I thought about the word family for a very long time. Here is what I understood that morning, sitting at my desk with a client's spreadsheet open in front of me. My father's words at that dinner table weren't really about Derek. Derek was a convenient excuse, a narrative device, a way of framing his refusal that put the fault somewhere outside himself. The real issue, the thing underneath all of it, was control. My father was a man who needed the world to follow his blueprint. Safe career, approved partner, predictable trajectory, no surprises, no deviations, no proof that a different way of doing things might produce better results. For 8 years I had been his most obedient investment. I kept his books, managed his risk, filed his taxes, caught his errors, saved him money he never acknowledged losing. I was useful in every measurable way. But the moment I chose something he hadn't pre-approved, I stopped being an asset. And Richard Henderson did not invest in liabilities. My mother's version of the same story was this. She had sacrificed her nursing career to raise us and run the register of her husband's store. When I built my own career from scratch, independently, successfully, without asking permission, I became living proof that her sacrifice was a choice rather than an inevitability. Vanessa, who married young and stayed close and continued to need them, made Janet's choices feel like destiny. I made them feel like options she had simply selected from a menu. They weren't punishing me for choosing Derek. They were punishing me for proving they'd had choices all along. 3 weeks after that dinner, Vanessa's engagement party. 50 people. Catered platters. Garlands and champagne flutes and the warm golden light of a family celebrating one of its own. Nobody asked me to help organize it. Nobody had to. Because that was what I did. I had always done it. I solved problems the way other people breathe, automatically, without being asked, without stopping to consider whether the effort would be acknowledged. I ordered the flowers from Patton's Florals, coordinated the catering with Wilson's Barbecue, printed the seating cards on my home printer at 11 o'clock the night before. It cost me $212 and 9 hours of my life. I arrived early the morning of the party, set up the tables, hung the garland, iced the champagne. When the guests arrived, I disappeared into the kitchen the way I always did, the invisible person ensuring that everything ran beautifully so everyone else could simply enjoy it. My mother stood up to make the toast. She thanked the caterer. She thanked the florist. She thanked Bradley's parents who had driven all the way from Savannah. She named every contributor to the evening. She did not say my name. Not once. Then she said something that I have never forgotten and will never forget. We can only pour our hearts into one celebration in this family. And she looked at me when she said it. Not with cruelty, Not with anger. With something far more devastating than either. Certainty. The absolute, unquestioned certainty of a woman who believed she was stating something obvious. Something that should have already been understood. Something that required no apology because it required no explanation. Bradley made a joke about the sister who crunches the numbers. Vanessa laughed. Richard laughed. The whole room laughed. And I stood in the kitchen I had personally decorated, holding a champagne flute I had personally purchased, and felt something happen inside me that I can only describe this way. Something clicked. Not broke. Not shattered. Not crumbled. Clicked. Like a lock engaging. Like the last tumbler in a combination finally falling into its correct position. I had been volunteering for my own erasure. Every flower I arranged. Every invoice I reconciled. Every free hour I gave to people who scheduled me into the background of their lives, and told each other the evening had gone beautifully without ever saying my name. I was building the scaffolding for a family portrait that had never included me. That night I drove home and did what I have always done when the world becomes too large and too confusing and too loud. I opened a blank spreadsheet. Not their numbers. Mine. Derek was on the couch when I walked in, sanding a small piece of walnut by the lamplight. He does that. Works with his hands in the evening the way other people read or watch television. He says it quiets his brain. He looked up when he heard my keys. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew. How bad? He said. I told him everything. The toast. My name left out of it. The laughter at Bradley's joke. The line about one celebration. My mother's certainty. The look on her face when she said it. Derek set down the sandpaper. I need to tell you something about Derek Morrison, because my father's dismissal of him was so spectacularly wrong that it deserves its own accounting. Derek's family lost everything when he was 16 years old. His father's business partner, a man who had been trusted completely and without question, quietly emptied the company's operating account and drove to Arizona and did not come back. They lost the business. They lost the trucks. They lost the house. They kept each other. And that was all. Derek dropped out of school in his junior year. Got his GED at night while working days. And then spent the next decade building himself back up one job site at a time, learning from men like his mentor Walt, a retired contractor who understood that the most important thing you can build is the kind of character that doesn't collapse under pressure. When my father called Derek a man without a real career, he was looking at a man who had already survived the kind of financial devastation that breaks most people permanently, and had rebuilt himself with nothing but discipline and refusal. My father saw a bankruptcy. He missed the man. Derek looked at me across the lamplight that evening and said the thing that I needed to hear more than any apology my family could have offered. You've been carrying their weight for free, Sarah. That's not what family does. That's what employees do. Except employees get paid. I sat down next to him on the couch. I told him my two decisions. First, I was resigning from Henderson Hardware's bookkeeping. Not with a text message. Not with an email. With a formal letter on professional letterhead. 3 paragraphs. Effective immediately. Because I am a CPA. And I know how to close an account with dignity. Second, I was done attending family events. Not with a confrontation. Not with a speech or a scene or a list of grievances. I was simply done. Quietly and completely and permanently done. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, you sure? I'm sure. He nodded. Picked the walnut back up. Started sanding again. Then we figure out the rest together. That was it. No dramatic vow. No grand gesture. Just a man with sawdust on his hands and walnut shavings on his jeans telling me he was not going anywhere. I wrote the letter that night. Professional letterhead. 3 paragraphs. Polite, precise, and permanent. I wasn't slamming a door. I was simply stopping the act of opening one. I hand-delivered the letter to Henderson Hardware on a Tuesday morning. The bell above the door chimed the same way it had been chiming since I was 10 years old. That particular bright, thin sound that had been the soundtrack of my childhood and then the background noise of 8 years of unpaid labor. My father was behind the counter, sorting lag bolts into bins. He looked up when I walked in. He looked like a man who expected me to be there to apologize. I set the envelope on the glass counter. "What's this?" he said. "My resignation from the bookkeeping. Effective immediately. Everything is current through this quarter." He opened it slowly. "Read it." And I watched his face move through confused, to disbelieving, to red. "After everything we've done for you." I had been waiting for that line. I looked at him steadily. "What have you done for me, Dad? Specifically?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because the honest answer, the factually accurate, mathematically supported answer, was that for 8 years the doing had traveled in one direction only. And both of us knew it, even if only one of us was willing to say so. I turned and walked back out into the morning. The bell chimed once more on my way out. Janet called that evening. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, without greeting. "When Derek leaves you with nothing, don't come crawling back." "I won't," I said. And I meant it with the full weight of every cell in my body. I did not block their numbers. I simply stopped answering. The calls came weekly at first. Then monthly. Then quarterly. Always the same cadence, never an apology, always a request disguised as concern. Always the voice of people who had confused access with relationship and compliance with love. I let them ring. Because walking away from people who are supposed to be your foundation is not a punishment. It is a tourniquet. I had been bleeding out from wounds they kept insisting didn't exist. And the only path to healing was to stop standing in the place where I kept getting cut. Derek and I got married 3 months later. Bibb County Courthouse, on a Wednesday. Total cost, $1,847. My dress came from a consignment shop on Cherry Street. Ivory lace, slightly too long, absolutely perfect. Derek wore the one good suit he owned and a tie his mentor Walt knotted for him in the courthouse parking lot because Derek's hands, so precise with a circular saw, had never quite mastered the Windsor knot. Our witnesses were my college friend Emma and Walt, who showed up in his best flannel shirt and called it formal. After the ceremony we had lunch at Hernandez Diner on Forsyth Street. Chicken fried steak. Sweet tea. Derek carved our initials into the wooden booth with his pocket knife while the waitress pretended not to notice. No orchids from Ecuador. No band from Nashville. No $100,000 gift from family. Just 2 people making a promise across a laminated menu in the best diner in Middle Georgia. That same week, Derek closed on a foreclosure. A 3-bedroom ranch on Jeffersonville Road. Purchase price $62,000. Buckled floors. Rotted porch columns. A kitchen that smelled like wet carpet and regret. A bathroom that appeared to have been remodeled by someone who had only heard bathrooms described secondhand. Derek walked through it the way a surgeon walks into an operating room, already seeing not what it was, but what it was going to be. Our plan was straightforward. He would renovate. I would manage the money. I set up the spreadsheet that first evening. Cost projections, renovation timeline, comparable sales within a 5-mile radius. Derek sketched the floor plan revision on graph paper at the kitchen table while I ran numbers on my laptop across from him. Other couples register for China, I told him. He smiled without looking up from the graph paper. We registered for a circular saw and a business license. 4 months later, we sold that house for $131,000. $41,000 in profit. Our first return on investment. I filed the capital gains paperwork. Derek was already looking at the next property listing before the ink was dry on the closing documents. The partnership that would change both our lives had officially begun. Vanessa's wedding happened on a Saturday in September. I wasn't invited. Emma went. She called me the following day, choosing her words with the particular care of a person who is describing someone else's party to the person who wasn't asked. Lake Sinclair venue. 214 guests. A live band flown in from Nashville. Orchids from Ecuador that wilted by the reception because nobody had accounted for Georgia humidity in September. Final cost, $87,000. My father gave a toast about investing in the future. I imagine he believed every word of it. Meanwhile, Derek and I were 3 weeks into the renovation of our second flip. A brick duplex off Pomona Avenue. Purchase price $71,000. Renovation costs $34,000. Final sale price $158,000. Profit $53,000. In 8 weeks. My sister spent $100,000 on a single night. Derek and I made $53,000 in 8 weeks. I am a CPA. Numbers live in my head whether I invite them or not. I am not built for the kind of selective amnesia that allows people to pretend the math isn't right there, waiting to be read. Emma mentioned one other detail from the reception. The week before the wedding, Bradley had leased a new BMW. $740 a month for a car he would never own, to impress people he would forget by Christmas. I didn't judge him. I just filed it away under the category I keep in my brain for patterns that tend to compound over time. Derek and I spent that September Saturday at a foreclosure auction in Warner Robins. We lost the bid by $2,000, drove home, ate leftover chili, and went to bed early. Some days the investment comes. Some days you drive home and eat chili. Both are fine. 7 months after I walked out of Henderson Hardware, my mother called. I was sitting in my car outside a property inspection in the middle of the morning, eating a granola bar and reviewing a contractor's bid. Her number appeared on my phone. I answered it. I still don't fully know why. Habit, maybe, or the ghost of a girl who had spent 30 years hoping that one of these calls would begin with the right words. Janet didn't say hello. Your father's back is acting up. He can't do inventory alone. And the new bookkeeper, she's made some errors on the quarterly filing. The IRS is asking questions. There might be penalties. I waited. Counted the seconds in my head. 3, 5, 8. No, how are you? No, we miss you. No, I'm sorry for what was said at that dinner table. My mother called me the way you call a wrench. Only when there's a leak. I hope you find someone to help, I said. I'm not available. Silence. Then sharper. You're really going to let your family struggle over some pride? It's not pride, Mom. It's a boundary. I hung up, set the phone on the passenger seat, stared at the contractor's bid until the numbers stopped swimming. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. 8 years of conditioning doesn't dissolve in 7 months. The guilt reflex fired sharp and familiar and trained. My hands actually wanted to reach for my laptop and pull up their accounting file. But I sat in that car in that parking lot and I let the feeling pass through me like weather. Because Derek had said it perfectly the night before, when I described the call to him. They called for your skills, Sarah. Not for you. And the difference between those two things, between being wanted for what you can do versus being wanted for who you are, was the difference between being family and being useful. I had spent 8 years confusing the two. I was done being confused. Year 1 closed. I ran the numbers the way I run everything, precisely, completely, without flattery or optimism. 3 flips completed. Total profit, $127,000. Net of taxes, fees, materials, and one catastrophic plumbing situation that taught Derek to always, check the main line before demolition day. I filed the paperwork for Morrison Property Group LLC on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Sarah Morrison. I had taken Derek's name when we married, and seeing it on a business license, printed in clean black type on our official document in a county courthouse building, felt like planting a flag in ground I had earned. Derek handled design, construction management, and the network of local subcontractors he'd spent a decade building trust with. I handled financing, permitting, accounting, insurance, tenant screening, and everything else that required a calculator and the kind of patience that comes from knowing exactly where every dollar lives. That spring we found a retired couple selling a small property management company, 6 rental units across our city, mostly long-term tenants who paid consistently and simply wanted working plumbing. Purchase price, $340,000, financed through a local credit union. I structured the deal so the cash flow was positive from the first month. The math was clean. Derek builds things. I build plans. Together we were building something neither of us could have built alone. And that same spring, we found the land. 5 acres outside city limits. Rolling hills. A stand of mature live oak trees along the ridge. $78,000. Derek walked the property line on a cool April morning and didn't speak for 10 full minutes. I walked behind him and didn't either. Then he stopped. looked up at the oaks, looked at the hill falling away toward the county road. "This is where we build our home," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a man who had grown up losing a home, standing on 5 acres of Georgia hillside, and recognizing something he had been building toward for 15 years without knowing exactly what shape it would take. I squeezed his hand. We drove home and I started the land acquisition spreadsheet before we'd even gotten back to the apartment. I started keeping a personal ledger around this time. Not for the business. QuickBooks handled the business with elegant precision. This ledger was different. I went back through 8 years of Henderson hardware files. My copies. My backups. The records I had kept with the meticulous habit of a person who understands that documentation is protection, and that someday, even if you can't see how, the numbers will matter. I cataloged every hour, every tax return, every vendor negotiation, every payroll cycle, every quarterly reconciliation, every insurance renewal, every cash flow projection. And then I priced each service at the current market rate for a licensed CPA in Middle Georgia. Quarterly bookkeeping, $12,000 a year. Annual tax preparation, $4,000. Payroll management, $6,000. Vendor negotiations and documented cost savings. Variable, but I had the records. The $14,000 billing error I caught in year 2. The insurance renegotiation that saved them $6,000 annually. The equipment lease restructure in year 5 that saved $1,800 a year. Every dollar documented. Every hour accounted for. The total sat at the bottom of the final page. $247,300. I stared at that number for a very long time. That was what 8 years of free labor looks like when you finally write the invoice. $247,000. My parents gave Vanessa $100,000 for a wedding. They told me I didn't deserve help. And the entire time, I had been subsidizing their survival to the tune of nearly $250,000. I closed the ledger, put it back in the filing cabinet. I didn't post about it anywhere, didn't call anyone, didn't send it to anyone as evidence or proof or accusation. I told Derek that night. He sat with the number for a long moment, just looked at it, then looked at me. "You were running their business, Sarah, for free, and they told you that you didn't deserve help." "I know," I said, "but this isn't about what they owe me anymore. It's about what I owe myself." He nodded slowly. We didn't speak for a while after that. And something changed in me in that silence. Not overnight. Not dramatically. More like the way a foundation settles after the house above it has been finished. Slowly, permanently, until one morning you realize the whole structure sits different. More solid. More true. I stopped flinching when a 478 area code appeared on my phone. Stopped driving the long way through town to avoid passing Henderson hardware. Stopped waking at 3 in the morning with my father's words playing back like a recording I hadn't asked to hear. $247,000. That number set me free. Not because I intended to use it. Not because I planned to present it as a bill or a case or a piece of evidence in some imagined courtroom. But because I finally had proof, documented, calculated, irrefutable proof, of what I had always felt but never been able to name. I was not the daughter who didn't deserve help. I was the daughter who had been helping all along. The business kept growing. Morrison Property Group closed on its 6th flip that season, a craftsman bungalow on College Street that Derek transformed from a structurally compromised disaster into a 3-bedroom showpiece with original hardwood floors, a restored front porch, and handmade kitchen cabinets that made the real estate photographer stop and stare. We were managing 12 rental units. Annual revenue, $380,000. I hired our first employee, a part-time property inspector named Glenn, methodical and careful, who reminded me immediately of Walt. Derek broke ground on our house in November. He had spent 4 months on the design. Modern farmhouse, the kind of structure that looks like it has been standing on that particular hillside for generations, even though every nail is new and every board was chosen deliberately. Wraparound porch. Stone fireplace. Reclaimed wood beams sourced from the houses we had flipped, oak from the Jeffersonville ranch, pine from the College Street bungalow, walnut from a duplex in East Macon. Derek said it often during construction, in that quiet way of his that made simple sentences feel significant. Every board has a story. The framing went up before Christmas. I stood on the unfinished porch, just plywood subfloor and open sky above me, and watched the winter sun drop behind our oaks. I was building not to prove anyone wrong, not to make a point, not to send a message. I was building because building was the truest thing I knew how to do. Meanwhile, Henderson Hardware had begun to bleed. I learned about it the way you learn most things in a small city, through the network of polite disclosure that governs places where everyone knows everyone. Judy Clemens, our insurance agent, mentioned it during a routine policy review. She didn't know my maiden name. I had been Morrison for 2 years, and Morrison is what she saw on the paperwork. Henderson Hardware is behind on their premiums, she said. I had to send a cancellation notice last month. I made some quiet calls. A supplier I still knew from my bookkeeping days confirmed the picture. The replacement bookkeeper, hired off an online classified listing for $4,000 to $5,000 a year, had compounded the payroll tax error that began under her predecessor. Missed quarterly estimated payments. Misfiled supplier invoices. Double paid 2 vendors. The total damage over 18 months, $6,000 to $7,000 in penalties and overpayments. My father's herniated disc had progressed. He was managing 4 hours a day at the store, most of it sitting on a stool behind the register in visible pain. My mother, 58 years old, was working the sales floor full-time for the first time in 20 years. And Vanessa and Bradley were too busy. Bradley's commission checks were disappearing into car payments and credit card minimums. Vanessa was contributing to the store's recovery effort by posting inventory photos on Instagram. 12 followers. 0 sales. I had written about this exact scenario in the 3rd paragraph of my resignation letter. Without consistent financial oversight, vendor relationships and tax compliance will deteriorate within 12 to 18 months. I had written it because I am a CPA, and forecasting risk is the job. I hadn't written it to be cruel or prophetic or right. I had written it because the numbers made it inevitable. Every projection I had made had landed. The store was bleeding precisely the way the spreadsheet said it would. And the person who could have prevented the hemorrhage was sitting on a hillside outside town, building a house with the man they'd called a mistake. My father came to our office on a Thursday afternoon in late autumn. Morrison Property Group operated out of a converted storefront on 2nd Street, glass front, clean signage, property listings pinned to the corkboard inside, Glenn at his desk running comparable sales analyses on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing a contractor's change order when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up. My father. First time I had seen him in 22 months. He was thinner than I remembered. He was walking with a cane. The disc had deteriorated enough that the cane was no longer optional. But his jaw was set exactly the way it had always been, the expression of a man who had decided he was correct and was waiting for the world to catch up. He looked around the office. The framed business license on the wall. The property listings. Glenn at his desk. The coffee machine in the corner that Derek had installed because he said a proper office had a proper coffee machine. Then he looked at me. You need to come back and help with the books, he said. No greeting. No acknowledgement of 22 months of silence. Just the request, delivered like a directive. Family helps family. I stayed in my chair. Family also shows up to each other's weddings, I said quietly. He blinked. Whatever he had rehearsed in the car on the drive over, whatever opening he had prepared, whatever appeal he had constructed, that line wasn't in the script. That was different. We were trying to protect you. From what? I gestured at the office. The walls. The desk. Glenn. The corkboard covered in properties we owned and managed and had built with our own labor and our own planning. From building this. He stood there. The cane trembled slightly. I couldn't tell if it was from the pain in his back or something else. I didn't come here to argue, he said. I came because we need help. I needed help too, I said. 3 years ago. You sat across a dinner table and told me I didn't deserve any. I didn't repeat the exact words. I didn't need to. They were already in the room, occupying the space between us more completely than anything either of us could have said. He turned. Walked back to the door. The bell chimed as he left. Glenn looked up from his screen. Everything okay? Yes, I said. I picked up the change order. Went back to work. Some columns don't reconcile. You close the account. You move forward. Vanessa and Bradley separated 22 months after the orchids wilted. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from Emma, who heard it from a mutual acquaintance, who heard it from Vanessa's hairdresser. Small cities have a faster information transfer rate than fiber optic cable. The details arrived in fragments over several days. Bradley's spending had accelerated dramatically after the wedding. The leased BMW. Weekend trips to Hilton Head charged to a joint credit card. A $15,000 watch described at the time as an investment in personal brand. Their combined credit card debt, $43,000. The dealership cut his sales territory in half after a difficult quarter. The BMW was returned. The watch went to a pawn shop on Eisenhower Parkway. Vanessa moved back into the yellow house on the street where we'd grown up. The childhood bedroom with the lavender walls and the TJ Maxx sunset poster she'd bought when she was 17. 29 years old. Twin bed. Scrolling through the wedding photos on her phone in a room that hadn't changed since she was a teenager. My parents invested $100,000 in my sister's future. 22 months later, that future was folded into a garment bag in a closet and classified under lessons learned. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard this. That surprised me. I had expected some version of it. Some dark, private vindication. Some small internal voice saying I told you so in the quiet of my own mind. Instead, what I felt was something closer to recognition. Vanessa was not my enemy. She had never been. She was a product of the same system that had tried to consume me. The difference between us was that she had let it. The safe investment, the one my father had chosen over me with such absolute confidence, had collapsed in under 2 years. The risky bet, the carpenter with a bankruptcy in his past and the CPA with a filing cabinet in her spare bedroom, was building a house on a hill that would appraise at $2.1 million. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't send a message. I just kept building. The best response to people who underestimate you is not revenge. It's a building permit, a poured foundation, and 12 months of compounding returns. Our house was finished in March. I remember the exact day because Derek carried me over the threshold and I cracked my head on the doorframe and we both laughed so hard we ended up sitting on the front porch steps eating cold pizza as the sun went down over our oaks. 4 bedrooms. 3 bathrooms. 2,800 square feet on 5 acres of Georgia hillside. Modern farmhouse, the kind that looks like it has been standing for generations, even though every nail was placed by hand and every design choice was deliberate. Reclaimed wood beams in the living room from every house we had ever flipped, each board with its own history. Handmade kitchen cabinets that Derek built over 3 weekends, sanding until the grain glowed like something you find at the bottom of a river. A stone fireplace that Derek laid himself from field stones we collected on our own property. A wraparound porch wide enough for a table, 10 chairs, and the rocking chair Walt gave us as a housewarming gift with a card that said simply, "You earned this." Appraised value, $2.1 million. Land cost, $78,000. Construction cost, $410,000. Derek's labor, 60% of the total build, done by a man who my father said didn't have a real career. I walked through the kitchen alone one morning before Derek was awake. I ran my hand along the butcher block counter, reclaimed from a bowling alley in Milledgeville that was being demolished to build condominiums. Every surface in this house was touched by his hands. Every number in our business was run through mine. My father said Derek didn't have a real career. I stood in a house that answered that assessment without saying a single word. Our first dinner in the house was the following weekend. Emma, Walt, Glenn, 2 subcontractors, and their wives. 12 chairs around the table Derek had built from a single slab of black walnut. I had built a dining room for 12 people. My family had a dining room with a seat they had never saved for me. The difference was not lost on me. Word traveled, the way it always does in small cities where the circles that matter are small and the connections between them are long and well maintained. The Morrisons built a house outside town. Big one. Up on the hill past the county road. The one with the oaks on the ridge. Derek Morrison. Wasn't he the one they used to call the bankruptcy kid? And his wife, Sarah Morrison. Wait. She's a Henderson. Like the hardware store? Like Richard and Janet Henderson's daughter? People started connecting the dots. Morrison Property Group was visible throughout the county. Our signs were on job sites. Our name was on sponsorship banners at the youth baseball fields. We were buying materials from local suppliers and hiring local contractors and showing up at community events as people who were building something that included the city around them, not just the properties within it. Meanwhile, Henderson Hardware looked like a long, slow exhale. Inventory thinning. Shelves with gaps where product used to stand. Richard absent most days. A help wanted sign in the window for 3 months straight. Customers making the drive to Warner Robins for the Home Depot instead. At First Baptist, where the Henderson family had occupied the third pew from the front for 2 decades, Janet's church friends had started asking questions. How's Sarah doing? We heard she built that beautiful place out on the hill. Janet's response never changed. Tight smile. Quick subject change. Redirect to the bake sale or the mission trip or the parking lot renovation fund. One neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, a retired school teacher who had known both Vanessa and me since we were in elementary school, said it directly one Sunday after service. Janet, you must be so proud of Sarah. Building all that from scratch. Self-made. Janet's face arranged itself into something that was technically a smile but contained none of the component parts of one. She excused herself to the restroom and did not return for 15 minutes. My mother had spent 30 years carefully constructing a reputation as the ideal family woman. My success, visible, local, undeniable, was the crack that let an inconvenient light through. Janet called on a Sunday evening. People are talking, she said. The controlled voice. The narrative management voice. They think we abandoned you. You didn't abandon me, Mom, I said. You just chose someone else. Silence. That's not fair, Sarah. We were worried about Derek. We wanted what was best for you. What was best for me was being seen, being valued, being included. You told a room full of people that you could only pour your hearts into one celebration in this family. I heard her breath catch on the other end. The sound of someone recognizing their own words arriving back at them with the full weight of their meaning. We didn't mean it like. You meant it exactly like that. And I built my life around that truth. She pivoted. She had been managing narratives for 30 years and the pivot was smooth. Vanessa is going through a terrible time. Bradley left her with all that debt. She needs her sister. Vanessa has her family, I said. You made that very clear at her engagement party. The call ended. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood at the window and looked out at the oaks in the early evening light. I didn't cry. Not because I was beyond it. Not because I was strong in some heroic sense of the word. But because I had already done my crying. Years of it. In my car after family dinners. In the shower after being passed over and overlooked and erased from toasts. Quietly at my desk at 1 a.m, running numbers that proved what I already knew but couldn't say out loud. There is a difference between grieving your family and grieving the idea of one. I had finished grieving the idea a long time ago. Year 2. The year the math stopped being impressive and became undeniable. 8 flips completed. Average profit per flip, $42,000. Total flip income, $336,000. 12 rental units generating $8,400 per month in net cash flow. 3 commercial renovation contracts signed, a dentist's office on Vineville Avenue, a barbershop on Broadway, and a co-working space in the old cotton warehouse district that Derek turned into something so beautiful that people drove 40 minutes to see it before it was even finished. Morrison Property Group's net worth crossed $1.2 million. No family money. No inheritance. No investor with a check and an agenda. A CPA's spreadsheet discipline and a carpenter's refusal to cut corners. The Macon Community Fundraiser Gala was the most significant social event of the year. A formal dinner at the Civic Center supporting the local food bank and youth development programs. White tablecloths. Silent auction. 200 guests from every layer of the community. Teachers, business owners, city council members, church elders, and every family whose name carried any weight in this city. Linda Prescott, the event organizer, called me in February. Morrison Property Group has done so much for this community this year, she said. We would be honored to have you and Derek as our presenting sponsors. I said yes. Not to make a statement. Not to be seen by anyone in particular. We had spent the year doing the work, sponsoring youth baseball, hiring local, partnering with Habitat for Humanity on a renovation project in the East Side neighborhoods. This was simply the natural extension of that. Henderson Hardware had been a fundraiser sponsor for 15 consecutive years. This year, Richard could barely afford the table tickets. Word reached Janet. Then Richard. Then Vanessa, who found out through Instagram because someone had tagged Morrison Property Group in the event announcement. She's going to show off, Vanessa told Janet. She's doing this to humiliate us. I heard about this later through the quiet and efficient communication network of a small city. It didn't surprise me. When you have spent your entire life as the center of your family's attention and resources, someone else's success stops feeling like its own thing. It feels like something aimed at you. A spotlight turned in your direction to illuminate the flaws you've been trying to keep in shadow. My family believed my success was about them. It wasn't. But I understood, in a way that surprised me, why they couldn't see that. 2 weeks before the fundraiser, Vanessa drove past our house. She was making deliveries for the store, a special order of cabinet hardware for a customer out past the county line. The route went along the road that borders our property. I wasn't home. Derek was in the workshop behind the house, cutting trim for a client's bathroom renovation. He heard a car slow down on the road, then stop. He looked up through the workshop window. A silver Honda. Engine running. A woman inside, gripping the steering wheel. Shoulders shaking. He didn't recognize her. He went back to work. He told me about it that evening. That was Vanessa, I said immediately. He paused. Your sister drove out here. She was making deliveries. The route goes past us. I thought about what she had seen from that road. The house rising from the hillside, white clapboard, dark shutters, a porch wrapping 3 sides. The workshop. The gravel drive lined with magnolia trees we'd transplanted from a demolition site. The gardens along the south side that a client's wife had helped me design and plant the previous fall. All of it built by the sister who married a mistake. All of it made possible by the carpenter who didn't have a real career. $2.1 million of a future my father had declined to fund. Emma called me later that night. Vanessa had called Janet from the driveway, crying. She kept saying, "How does she have that? How does Sarah have a house like that?" Janet had no answer. Because the answer was the kind of mathematics that even she could not rearrange to mean something more comfortable. Sarah has that because she is Sarah. And you dismissed her. The fundraiser was in 14 days. All 3 of them had decided to come. The Macon Civic Center on a warm April evening. White tablecloths. Centerpieces of magnolia, the same flower that lined our driveway, which felt like the kind of coincidence that is actually just the universe being efficient. 200 guests filing through the double doors in their best clothes, the air carrying the particular mixture of perfume and optimism that formal charity events always produce. Derek and I arrived at 6:30. I wore a navy dress, simple, no visible labels, chosen for comfort and durability, the same way I choose everything. Derek wore his one good blazer and the tie I had bought him at the same consignment shop where I'd found my wedding dress. He tugged at the collar every 30 seconds the entire drive over, and I pretended not to notice because it was the most endearing thing I had ever seen. My parents were already there. Table 14. Near the back. Richard in a suit jacket that hung differently than it used to. The weight loss visible in the way the shoulders Saturday. Janet with the smile she wore at church. The one engineered to project serenity and cover everything beneath it. Vanessa beside them. A dress I recognized from the boutique where she used to work. Employee discount pricing. Still had the fold crease at the neckline from storage. The room noticed us in the way rooms notice when the 2 known halves of an unfinished story appear in the same space simultaneously. The whispers and the glances and the polite choreography of 200 people selecting sides while performing the theater of not doing so. We found table 3. Presenting sponsors. Near the stage. Derek squeezed my hand under the tablecloth and I squeezed back. Vanessa intercepted me at the refreshment table 10 minutes into the evening. She positioned herself in my path and kept her voice low. The kind of quiet that is more aggressive than shouting. Nice of you to show up somewhere you're not wanted. I looked at her. I was invited, Vanessa. I was asked to sponsor. You're only here to make us look bad. I looked at my sister, 29 years old, living in our childhood home, rebuilding from a credit score in the low $500s and $43,000 of someone else's decisions left behind like furniture he hadn't wanted to move. I'm here, I said quietly, because I believe in this community, the same way I believed in our family, until our family made it clear the feeling wasn't mutual. I stepped around her and went back to my table. Linda Prescott took the stage at 7:15. She thanked the volunteers, the committee, the donors, the organizational partners. Then she got to the sponsors. This year's presenting sponsors are a couple who embody everything this fundraiser is about, she said, adjusting the microphone with both hands. They came to Macon with nothing but a business plan, a set of hand tools, and an unshakable belief in each other. In 3 years, they flipped 8 homes, created employment for a dozen local workers, donated to youth sports, partnered with Habitat for Humanity, and built one of the most respected property companies in Middle Georgia. She paused. Please join me in welcoming Derek and Sarah Morrison of Morrison Property Group. The room stood. 200 people. Teachers who had taught me in high school. Business owners who had seen our signs on job sites across the county. Church members who had watched the Henderson family sit in the third pew every Sunday for 20 years. People who had been told by someone that Sarah had moved away for work. 200 people. Standing. Applauding. For the daughter they were told didn't deserve help. I stood. I nodded. I sat back down. No speech. No wave. No moment milked for more than it needed. Just acknowledgement. Clean and true. Across the room, at table 14, my father stared at his plate. The tendons in his neck drawn so tight I could see them from 20 feet away. My mother's smile had not moved in 3 minutes. The kind of expression that takes every facial muscle working simultaneously to maintain. Vanessa's eyes were wet. She wiped them with a cocktail napkin she had been slowly shredding since Linda had begun to speak. Throughout dinner, people came to our table. Not a flood, a steady current. One at a time, the way meaningful things tend to arrive. We're so glad you and Derek are part of this community. Your renovation on Broadway is beautiful. My daughter's piano teacher has a studio there now. My son applied for a job with your company last month. He said it was the most professional interview process he'd ever gone through. Each one arrived like a line item on a ledger I had never intended to keep. At table 14, the Hendersons received the particular and complete social experience of people who have spent years telling a story that the room has now finished fact-checking. Nobody was cruel to them. But 200 people pay attention to who builds things up and who tears them down. And 200 people had been watching this particular family for a long time. My father found me during the silent auction. The crowd had dispersed through the East Wing, browsing the framed watercolors and weekend getaway packages and restaurant gift certificates arrayed along the display tables. I was reading the description on a painting of the Ocmulgee River, quiet colors, honest brushwork, when he appeared beside me. He smelled like the aftershave he'd worn my entire life. Underneath it, something sharper. The faint metallic edge of a man running on insufficient sleep and too much adrenaline. You've made your point, he said. Low. Controlled. The voice from 30 years of supplier negotiations. Now stop making us look bad. I kept reading the painting's description. I'm not making you look like anything, Dad. I'm living my life. We gave your sister that money because she needed it more. She didn't have your skills. I turned then. Really looked at him. 61 years old. Bad back. Dyeing store. The daughter he'd invested in returning to the childhood bedroom she'd left on a wave of orchids and optimism. And standing here, in front of the daughter he'd dismissed, asking her to make herself smaller so he could feel larger. I needed it too, I said. Maybe not the money, but the belief. The faith. The same faith you gave Vanessa without a second thought, because she fit the picture you'd already decided on. I was trying to protect. From what? I kept my voice absolutely level. From building a $2 million home? From employing 12 people? From standing in this room tonight as the presenting sponsor of the fundraiser that used to have your name on the banner? His mouth opened, closed. He had no script for this conversation. For 30 years his authority had been the final word in every room he occupied. He had never needed a script because no one had ever required one. Now he was standing in front of someone whose numbers were larger, whose reputation was stronger, and whose voice was calmer than he had any preparation for. He turned and walked back to table 14. It happened 8 minutes later. I was back at our table, talking quietly with Derek about bidding on the river painting, when the specific quality of silence dropped over the room, that particular hush that falls when something private becomes unavoidably public. I looked up. Janet was walking toward us. Not quickly, deliberately. Each step placed with the precision of someone who has been building toward a moment and has finally decided they are out of time. She stopped 3 feet from our table. Close enough that I could see the mascara beginning its slow migration at the corners of her eyes. "You're punishing us." Her voice was loud enough for the tables immediately around us to hear. Then louder, as though the act of speaking had opened something that could not be reclosed. "You built this whole life just to throw it in our faces. You're showing off your house, your business, your sponsorship, to humiliate us." I stood up. Not quickly. The way you stand when you need someone to see that you are not afraid. That you have not been afraid for a very long time. "Mom, I didn't build my life to punish you. I built it because you told me I was on my own. So I went on my own. We sacrificed everything for this family." Her voice cracked. 200 people had gone completely still. "I gave up my career. Your father gave up his health for that store. And you walked away. You left us. You sacrificed for the family you chose," I said quietly. "I wasn't part of that family. You told me that at Vanessa's engagement party. You told me that when Dad looked across the dinner table and said those words. You don't get to be angry that I listened." Vanessa had crossed the room. She appeared behind Janet on autopilot, drawn, I think, by the particular gravity of a scene that had been building for 3 years. "You always had to be better than everyone," she said. "You always had to prove something." I looked at my sister. For a long moment I just looked at her. The dress from the boutique. The eyes wet with something that wasn't just embarrassment. The jaw set with an anger that I suspected was covering something softer and sadder underneath. "I didn't have to be better, Vanessa," I said. "I just had to survive without you." The room was completely silent. 200 people. Untouched plates. Abandoned conversations. Every eye in the Macon Civic Center trained on 3 women and 30 years of buried truth finally breaking the surface. At table 14, my father had not moved. He sat with his hands folded on the tablecloth, staring at the surface in front of him like a man reading a verdict he has been expecting for a long time and still isn't prepared to hear. Janet's face crumpled. She opened her mouth. Closed it. The speech she had been assembling, the argument, the defense, the counter-accusation, seemed to dissolve somewhere between intention and language. "You don't know what it's like," she finally managed. "To watch your daughter walk away." "You're right," I said. "I don't know what it's like to watch a daughter walk away. I only know what it's like to be the daughter who had to." I sat down. Derek took my hand under the table. I picked up my fork. I did not leave. I did not storm out. I did not deliver a final parting line designed to be remembered. I returned to my seat. My dinner. My life. Because there was nothing left to prove. The confrontation was over. Not because I won. There is no winning in the collapse of something that was supposed to hold you. But because there was nothing left in the room that needed to be said. The Hendersons left at 8:45. Janet first, moving quickly toward the exit with her purse against her chest. Vanessa behind her, head down, the shredded cocktail napkin still in her hand. Richard last. He moved slowly with the cane. Paused at the double doors. Turned and looked back at the room one final time, the white tablecloths, the silent auction displays, the stage where 200 people had stood for his daughter, before stepping into the parking lot. The gala continued. The band played. The auction closed. People found their way back to conversation and dessert and the ordinary business of an April evening. And then, one by one, they came to my table. Mrs. Talbot, the retired schoolteacher who had taught both Vanessa and me. She sat in the empty chair beside me and took my hand. "We always wondered why you stopped coming around," she said. "Now we understand." Harold, a deacon from First Baptist, shook Derek's hand. "Your wife's mother told people Sarah had moved away for work. We didn't know the truth." My ninth-grade English teacher, a woman I barely recognized until she said my name, touched my arm gently. "I taught both your girls. I always knew you were the steady one. I'm sorry I never said it when it would have counted." I thanked each of them. Meant it completely every time. Outside in the parking lot, Richard sat alone in his truck. Janet and Vanessa had already gone. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel the way Derek told me Vanessa had sat in front of our house 2 weeks earlier. Same grip, different driveway, same reckoning. Emma's husband was parked 2 rows over. His window was open. He heard fragments through the still April air. I was trying to protect her. Richard believed that. He would always believe that. The architecture of self-deception is built to survive confrontation, to reframe loss as misunderstood intention, to convert I was wrong into I was misunderstood. But sitting alone in that parking lot, with 200 people's applause still faintly audible through the Civic Center walls, Richard Henderson knew something for perhaps the first time with real clarity. Intentions do not matter when the damage has already been done. He started the engine. He drove home alone. Derek and I were the last sponsors to leave. We stayed to help Linda's team stack chairs and break down the auction tables. Old habits from years of showing up early and staying late for people who didn't always notice. The parking lot was nearly empty. April air, warm and heavy with the sound of cicadas waking up in the tree line. Janet was standing by the exit. I don't know how long she had been there. She had cleaned up in the restroom, the mascara gone, the composed surface restored. But her eyes were swollen and she stood the way people stand when they've been rehearsing something for an hour and still don't fully trust that the words will come out in the right order. "Come home for dinner," she said. "Sunday. We can try to fix this. We can be a family again." I looked at my mother, the woman who had erased my name from a toast, who had said, in front of 50 people and with absolute certainty, that the family could only pour its heart into one celebration, who had called me when the books were broken but never when my birthday came, who had told church friends for 3 years that Sarah had simply moved away for work. I loved her. I had always loved her and I suspected I always would. That particular love, the one built into you before you have the vocabulary to describe or question it, does not dissolve because the person stops deserving it. But love and access are different accounts. And I was no longer extending unlimited credit. "I am home, Mom," I said. "I've been home for 3 years. You just never came to visit." Her face crumpled for the second time that evening. "I didn't know where you lived. You didn't ask." We stood there, 10 feet of concrete between us and 3 years of choices that could not be unchosen. Derek took my hand. We walked to the truck. I didn't slam the door on my mother that night. I didn't close it with finality or ceremony or the satisfaction of a last word. I simply stopped pretending it was open in a way that it wasn't. The engine turned over. The headlights swept the parking lot. I caught Janet in the side mirror, still standing by the exit, arms folded around herself against the April air, until the road curved and the Civic Center disappeared entirely. Georgia crickets filled the truck cab with their sound. Derek drove. I watched the dark hillside pass. We went home to the house we built on the land we bought with the money we earned. We went home. The fallout arrived the way compound interest does, quietly at first, and then all at once and undeniably. Henderson Hardware went up for sale 4 weeks after the fundraiser. 22 years of inventory and identity, listed with a commercial broker on Cherry Street. A regional chain bought the location for $160,000, $80,000 less than the building was worth. Richard signed the closing documents in a broker's office with a notary and a pen and no ceremony whatsoever. No toast. No speech about investing in the future. Just the end of a legacy that I had personally kept solvent for 8 years. Vanessa moved to Atlanta in June. A job at a home goods retail chain. $9.50 an hour. A studio apartment she shared with a roommate she found through an app. 29 years old, rebuilding from a credit score in the low $500s and $43,000 of someone else's debt left behind like furniture he hadn't wanted to move. Janet sat alone in the third pew at First Baptist the following Sunday. Richard's back had progressed to the point of requiring a surgical consultation in Atlanta, too far for a Sunday round trip. The church friends who had once admired the Henderson family, the stable husband, the beautiful younger daughter, the 22-year business, the reliable Sunday presence, did not approach Janet after the service. Not from cruelty. From the particular social awkwardness that descends when everyone in the room knows the full story and no one can figure out what to say about it. 3 years of my silence had cost my family their store, their social standing, and the carefully maintained narrative they had built their identity around. I didn't cause any of it. I simply stopped preventing it. There is a difference between revenge and withdrawal. Revenge requires energy, intention, ongoing investment. Revenge keeps you attached to the people who hurt you, requires you to monitor their pain, to measure your satisfaction against their suffering. Withdrawal just requires truth. I withdrew. The store revealed itself. The marriage revealed itself. The reputation revealed itself. I was simply no longer in the way of the revealing. Morrison Property Group reached 25 rental properties by fall. 8 full-time employees. Annual revenue tracking toward $1.4 million. Derek had begun designing a community workshop for veterans, free classes in carpentry and basic home repair, funded by our company, hosted in the Broadway warehouse he had transformed the previous year. I planted a vegetable garden behind the house. Tomatoes, zucchini, basil, snap peas climbing a trellis Derek welded from salvaged rebar. In the mornings I sat on the porch with coffee and watched the fog lift off the hills behind the oaks. I did not post on social media. Did not give interviews. Did not drive past the building on Main Street that had been Henderson Hardware and was now a fast food franchise with fluorescent signage and a parking lot where the garden section used to be. I had no interest in the ruins. I was occupied with the building. A letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. Plain white envelope. My father's handwriting, the particular slant and weight of it that I had been reading in the margins of vendor invoices for 8 years and would recognize anywhere. I opened it standing at the mailbox with the afternoon sun warm across my shoulders. 3 words on a folded piece of notebook paper. I was wrong. No context. No explanation. No request attached to the admission. No return address, though I knew exactly where he lived. Just that. Blue ink. 3 words. A folded crease. I read it twice. Carried it inside. Sat at the kitchen table, the butcher block table Derek had built, for a long time. Ran my thumb along the fold. Then I put it in the filing cabinet. Same drawer as the ledger. Same drawer as the resignation letter. Same drawer as the life I had fully accounted for and carefully moved past. Forgiving my father was not something I owed him. It was something I would give myself, when I was ready. Some accounts take longer to reconcile than others. Some balance sheets never fully close. And that is acceptable. That is human. What I know now, what I have known for some time, in the way you know things that have been proven rather than simply felt, is this. The people who told me I didn't deserve help gave me something they never intended to give. They gave me certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty that everything I built, every wall, every number, every quiet morning on that porch with coffee going cold in my hand, was mine. Completely and without condition. Mine. Built by my hands and the hands of the man they called a mistake. $100,000 for a wedding that lasted 22 months. $247,000 in free labor that no one ever acknowledged. A $2.1 million home built by a carpenter's hands and a CPA's discipline on 5 acres of Georgia hillside. And a family that learned too late that the person they had spent years looking past was the one who had been holding everything together. I was standing at my kitchen window when I saw the silver Honda slow down on the county road. She sat at the edge of our gate for a long time. I stood at that window for a long time. Neither of us moved. And I understood, watching my sister cry in a driveway she'd never visited. This is what it costs to dismiss someone who was always worth more than you told them. This is what it costs. And this is what it means to finally, completely, and without apology, know your own worth. If you have ever been the one they looked past, the one who sat at the end of the table and ate quietly while someone else was celebrated, the one who kept everything running and was never named in the toast, the one they called when something broke, but never when a birthday came, the one who finally, one ordinary morning, stopped opening a door that was never held open for them in return, then you already know exactly how this story feels. You know the silence after the last call. And you know the sound of your own life getting louder once theirs goes quiet. Build your table. Set your own chairs. And never, never, let anyone convince you that the seat at it belongs to someone else. By the way, where are you watching this story from tonight? Leave a comment below, because it is genuinely extraordinary how far these stories travel, and it means everything to know that someone on the other side of the world needed to hear exactly this tonight. Thank you for being here.